This episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies. I'm so grateful that parents these days have a safer device option for our kids, and that is the Bark phone. The Bark phone was built for families who are looking to ramp up their child's digital safety. It has parental controls built in, unlike the iPhone, and helps us manage their entire digital experience super easily. More on Bark in the episode notes, but let's get into my conversation with Laura Lawrence. So, welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today, I am joined by a mom of four, a former educator, author and founder of Youth Matter Canada, Laura Lawrence. Welcome.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me today.
You are so welcome. I'm so excited to be connected with you. We have lots to cover. We've connected before and we have a lot to chat about. Probably our time is not going to be enough, but we can always do a follow-up. I want to back up and start with just talking about youth mental health in general and the status where kind of we're at these days. So can you share what trends you're seeing related to kids and their mental health? What are the sources for the issues that they're dealing with?
Absolutely. So I'll share with everyone that I started my journey as an educator, spent 15 years in the classroom in many different roles as a teacher, as a coach, as a mentor. I've been working with youth for 30 years. So having seen kind of the trajectory of changes in terms of what's going on in their external worlds, stressors, pressures, it's been really interesting to see such a change, especially in the last 10 years. When I pivoted from my teaching career, I then always felt called back to the classroom. So started being hired by schools and colleges and different organizations to go in and talk about mindfulness and mental wellness, really teaching kids the power of emotional intelligence, the power of being able to self-regulate, to talk about their emotions, giving them skills, tools, strategies. And that led me to starting to write books and the founder of Youth Matter Canada. And so some of the things, I was just actually doing a post yesterday because we had an unfortunate incident happen in a school here locally where a 14-year-old girl attacked a 15-year-old girl and tried to start her on fire. In fact, she did.
Oh my,
it was
Laura.
Very disturbing, very shocking. It's a smaller city in Saskatchewan, Canada. And so my husband and I are like, why is this happening? What is happening?
Induced by social media? Was someone trying to capture it?
That we don't know the details. The news, doesn't release all of those details. But what I can tell you is through the work we do with Youth Matter Canada, we're always engaged with schools, parents, youth, and have a good pulse on what's going on. And so when I look back at, let's say 15 to 20 schools that we've talked to over the last 6 months, the top 5 things they say that kids are dealing with, number 1 is anxiety. 2 is depression. 3 is self-harm, suicidal ideation. 4 is bullying and violence. And 5 is substance abuse. So that here are the top 5 things. Now, we know the stats and the experts are saying, that social media and digital spaces and online presence and pressure, all those trap doors kids can fall into, and the temptations of being online and in these app platforms just exasperate all 5 of those challenges.
Yeah. For sure. And man, I just keep getting surprised over and over at the things that teenagers these days will do. And,
their cries for help, right?
Yeah. Like I don't want to blame them because they've been set up to fail in a lot of ways and they don't understand the ramifications of their actions. They've been inundated with anonymous platforms where they can get away with anything and violence and all these crazy things at early ages. And when you mention, I want to note on the suicide and self-harm piece, I think parents don't truly understand that a new stat shows 9% of teenagers have attempted suicide in the past year.
Yeah.
And that is so scary. I think that's one of the first stats that I was looking at when I was creating this podcast and even naming it, because I was really seeing that link between the amount of time kids are scrolling and the things they're getting access to, and the self-harm stats and the suicide stats are just
It's horrifying.
Really shocking. Horrifying.
It's horrifying. And we have, with Youth Matter Canada, we're going on hosting our 4th annual Youth Matter Symposium. So it's basically a conference where we bring about 300 kids together from 15 different communities, and we talk about mental health. We bring in speakers, but we poll the kids and we ask them, what are the pressures? What are they facing? And every year I'm alarmed to see the stats go higher and higher about how many kids are, self-harming and have suicidal ideation. And it is just, as somebody who is in this mental health space for kids, as a parent of 4, as someone whose own child experienced multiple online harms, despite my education, my awareness, my strict boundaries, it is like what you said. It's like they're set up to fail. And when I speak to youth, I've spoken to over 10,000 youth in the last number of years, both as an author, as a mental health speaker, but also with Youth Matter Canada. I always say to them, I start and I lead with, it's never been harder to be a kid than it is these days. And immediately I get their attention, Nikki, because they're like, this woman sees us, she hears us, she knows.
Yeah. I wonder what you're hearing specifically from them, because I started interviewing teenagers for the first time. And what I'm learning is that they don't really like social media. They're only on it because all of their friends are, and they feel like they're missing out if they're not on it. What are you hearing from them that has kind of surprised you or resonated with you?
Well, what's really interesting is we just finished doing an anonymous online survey of youth ages 12 to 18 and just gather some data about their tech use and things they're seeing and hearing and experiencing. And there was a few things that shocked me. If I can share, because I think that it's a good sample and representation of not just the kids up here in rural Canada, but what we're seeing everywhere, right?
Yes.
So 75% of the kids shared that they spend 4 or more hours a day on social media or on their phones. And we know that 3 or more hours doubles their risk of anxiety and depression.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
I was shocked to hear that 90% of kids keep their phone in their rooms at night.
No, Laura.
And so many of these kids were grades 4 to 6. And when I speak in schools and I ask that question, the answers of the kids are very parallel to the survey we did. So about 90% of kids, no matter their age, are keeping their phones in their rooms at night. And 68% of kids said their parents never check their phones.
Okay. Why is it so bad for kids to have their phones in their rooms at night, in your opinion?
So we know that isolation and nighttime, is a breeding ground for predators. My son, who experienced his own online harm, said, that is when the DMs come from these predators. They'll groom you during the day. They'll try to have this conversation with you. And then at night is when they come hit with the harder stuff. And I think so the isolation and also the addiction, right? So, and what's happening and what we're seeing is that kids are distracted, attention fragmentation. They're sleepy. They are irritable. They're moody. It's because they're on their phones at night, and it's distracting. And, my son asked me, he's 14. He said, when am I going to be able to keep my phone in my room at night? And I said, not until you leave this house. It's just not going to happen.
Simple step. You get them an alarm clock and you got everything handled, and they can read books at night, draw, whatever they need to do.
They don't need it. And, if you're a parent like me who has parental controls and I have, his phone turns off at the same time every night, he still doesn't keep it in his room because they're so smart. They're smarter than us. They have workarounds. You never know.
Yes, they do.
They do. The other thing I was going to share that really, I think, was eye-opening for me is we asked kids, do tech companies do enough to keep you safe online? 75% of the kids said no.
Okay. Is there any follow-up information or comments on that?
No. So what's interesting is, and of course, correlation doesn't equate causation, but if 75% of the kids we've surveyed are saying that tech companies don't do enough to keep them safe online, as an educator and a parent, I would infer that means that these children have already come into contact with online harms.
There you go. 100%. Right. And we all know the report. I hear the stories from parents, and the reporting tools don't work. Kids are getting contacted by predators. Kids are getting sent sexualized imagery or asked for sexualized imagery, asked to be paid for sexualized imagery. It's just, the harms are countless. And you mentioned your son's experience with an online harm. Do you mind sharing about that?
Absolutely. I can. And that's how I met you and came into contact with you. And first, I want to share that I have his permission to share this publicly. He knows that this is going on an international platform. It was an extremely difficult time for him, for us, for all of us. But I think the reason why it's important that I share this story is because every parent who has a child who has a phone has the potential, very great potential for their child to experience the same harms. So I'll take you back. There was one evening where I was out late and I came home and his phone was in my room and his phone rang at 1 a.m. And it said no caller ID. And I was so tired that night. I didn't answer it. I hung up. And then that mom instinct, I was like, well, that's really weird. Why is he getting a call at 1 a.m. with no caller ID? So then that prompted me to do a spot check on his phone, which I'd done periodically. And I went immediately into some of the DMs in the app platforms. And TikTok was where I actually found some DMs from a predator who had started to groom him, had gotten to the point where my son had given him his personal phone number. So then there was DMs, there was text messaging happening on the phone. And thankfully, my son got to, because we've had the conversation prior to. So let me back up and say, my son didn't get access to TikTok, Snapchat, doesn't have Instagram until he was 14. And I wanted to delay, but there were so many pressures from, the teams. He's a competitive athlete he was on, that all these kids are communicating in the groups. And so he's being left out, right? Yep. So when we finally did cave, and I'm going to say that because that's what most parents do, they cave. It's the pressure of you want your child not to be left out. Yeah. Within 1 month, the harms were happening. I hadn't found out about them though until about 4 months later. So on that deep dive of looking into these DMs and these predators that were trying to, solicit information from him with the intent of sexualizing him, of course, and exploiting him, I had also discovered that he, like many other kids his age, made a mistake. And he shared an image of himself that he thought was private with another girl. And it was via Snapchat. She took a screenshot of it, and you can just imagine what happened from there. Right? These spaces are viral. And so what happened was that hundreds, if not thousands of other kids in, his own community, but in neighboring communities, saw this photo. And we have an open communication. He knows that, I work in this mental health space, but he's a kid.
Yeah.
And
normal kid.
Normal. He's a good kid.
Right.
And good. I remember, interviewing a parent who lost a child to an online harm. And he said, good kids make bad choices. And these platforms just serve up on a silver platter all of the temptations and all of the trapdoors they possibly can to our kids. Even adults can't make good decisions on these things.
No. In a real false sense of safety, because on Snapchat specifically, they make kids think that their snaps disappear and that nothing could ever get out. But look at your example. And since then, just this week, the state of New Mexico has sued Snapchat because of the false sense of security that they're giving kids. And they're actually Snapchat is now the number one platform for sextortion, for sexual exploitation. There was a study done on photos of children on the dark web, sexualized photos, and most of them found in the study were taken from Snapchat.
Yeah. I loathe that app. If there is one app I can say to parents that you just don't give your child if you don't have to, it's Snapchat.
Yeah.
It's just such a disaster of an app for kids.
Well, and the whole point of it to hide and destroy, in quotes, destroy what you are sharing. What is the point of that? Why should things that kids share between each other with adults be destroyed? And then they're not even destroyed. So it's that false sense of security that's very dangerous.
And it's not only the sexualized content and the intimate images going back and forth. It's also the cyberbullying. I have countless kids and families reach out to me and say, can you help me? My child is being bullied so bad on Snapchat. They are depressed. They just, it is such an exclusive platform where you're either in or you're out. And that it has all these different types of features that rate kids, how close of friends they are, the snap streak. I mean, it just gets kids. My own kid used my credit card so that he could download, the ultimate snap. I don't know what it even is.
Snapchat Plus.
Snapchat Plus.
No way.
And since we've had the conversation, and here's what kids are telling me when I go out in schools and talk, and my own kid too, it's like they know that they have them hooked.
Mm-hmm.
They feel it. They don't know a way out.
Mm-hmm. It gives them anxiety, is what they're sharing with me, that if they need to keep their streak up by snapping with their friend every day, or they lose their streak. And then guess what? You lose your streak. You can pay to upgrade to get your streak back. It's such manipulation into paying money, and not even their money. Usually it's our money.
It is our money. And when I say to kids, I say to them, listen, I want you to really understand the nature of these app platforms and what their intention is, which is only to make money. And you are a pawn, and your digital identity is weaponized. Your mental health is weaponized. You know, they are playing you. And so many times I'll have kids come up to me after and say, Laura, I want to delete all of my apps, but I just feel like I can't. Mm-hmm. How sad is that, Nikki?
It's so sad. And sometimes they delete, and then a week later, they just can't stand it because things are going on that they are being left out of. And I understand that's a real feeling. And
it's fear of missing out.
Hard.
But in my son's case with Snapchat, if an app like that could censor, and let's be honest, social media apps and tech companies can censor content. We all know that. Yeah. If it didn't allow, like immediately blocked the sending of intimate images or pornographic content, or, you know, then the kids couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. There you go. It is a choice to allow the nude imagery to be sent, because the technology, the AI technology, exists to identify not only nude imagery, but that it's a minor. There's technology, AI now, to identify if it's a minor in the photo. So on Instagram, for example, the photo will be flagged within their messenger on Instagram, and it'll be blurred, and it'll say this photo may be child sexual abuse material, and then you can see it anyway. And they may have removed this now that Senator Ted Cruz called them out on it publicly, but it used to say see anyway. And so you're telling me you're identifying that it's a nude imagery and it's probably a minor, and you're going to let people look at it? Like, where's the liability in that?
Yeah. And I want parents to know, because I'll tell you, I will never forget the day where I sat, face to face with my son, and his head was buried in his hands and he was crying because the impact on his mental health, his reputation, you can't take that back. And, he now is like, I want other kids to know, he said, I made the ultimate mistake, and they pay the price. Do they ever pay the price, Nikki? And it's heartbreaking for me. And, he had even some of his close friends share the image. And I immediately reported it to the police. And up here in Canada, it's called Section 162 in the Criminal Code, which if a person shares an intimate image of another person without that person's consent, it's punishable by law. They can be charged. They could even serve jail time. And I wanted these kids and even these parents to know that if you hand your kid a phone, they are socially responsible and accountable for their behaviors, good, bad, or otherwise. And you also are accountable as the parent who allowed it and who's paying for the phone. So we got to think about these things.
Mm-hmm. And that's the right way to go. Like, this is too harmful to the kids. They need to penalize it. And a lot of states here in the U.S. are initiating legislation to penalize in some way sharing of specifically a child sexual abuse material. So a nude image of a minor that's been sent to you, even if you weren't involved, you just send it on. Your child could get in trouble for that. And on the federal level, Senator Ted Cruz, so I have an interview with him that is live now by the time people listen to this. He introduced a bill called the Stop CSAM Act that will, I believe, make sharing of CSAM a felony. So there are some big time
and shouldn't it be?
Yeah,
it should be. Why are we having this conversation? And up here in Canada, we're so far behind you guys. We're so far behind the legislation that you are rolling out, because you have active parents who have experienced the most unimaginable harms to their kids and have lost children. But that's happening up here in Canada. Just here a couple of months ago, we had a couple of students in different provinces take their lives over a sextortion scam.
Yes, right. And let me tell you, and Bark is not available where you are yet. And there's now a request form for different countries to add Bark technologies availability. But the Bark phone does not even allow you to take a nude photo of yourself and save it to the camera roll, let alone share it on any platform or send it through the messaging. So this technology exists just to nip this in the bud and stop traumatizing children over silly little normal mistakes that kids make. Like, we've all been there. Pausing here to talk about tools that can help you manage your child's screen time and access to harmful content online, and that is the Bark Phone and the Bark Parental Monitoring app. Bark goes way beyond screen time monitoring, and they use advanced AI to scan text messages, social media, images, videos, and audio for threats like drug content, cyberbullying, and even child sexual abuse material. The Bark Phone actually doesn't even let your child take a nude image and save it to the camera roll. So the Bark Phone is the most customizable kids phone with monitoring built in, and it is the safest option. But if you've already given your kid an Android or an iPhone and you don't want to switch it up, please layer on the Bark app, which is high-tech parental monitoring, scans their activities for harmful content. You can create screen time schedules. You can block certain websites and apps, and a ton more. Back to my conversation with Laura. I really am sorry that your son went through that for just something that is a normal teenage behavior thing.
Well, and the harassment that came from it. I mean, here we are 6 months later and he's starting school and he's still getting messages from buddies. His friends are getting messages. Kids, one thing, I mean, I've spent 30 years working with kids. At their heart of hearts, kids are good kids, but they're all wanting to fit in, to belong, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And sometimes they'll do anything to do that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
At the expense of another child's mental health, and they're making mistakes and they, it is our job as educators, as teachers, as parents, as government officials to put in these stops, these guardrails for kids. And I cannot believe that it's taken us so long to realize, I mean, how many kids have been harmed in the last, 10, 20 years?
Thousands of kids have been killed or taken their own lives because of these kind of things.
Yeah.
And it continues to happen every day. And here in the US, we're close to passing the Kids Online Safety Act and getting some liability on the tech companies. And I do think that will initiate some waves of legislation in other countries, which is going to be so important.
I so hope so. We have some legislations, that are in place for, hate speech and such like that online. But, nobody's thinking about the kids. And as a youth advocate, I'm always like, where's the kids? Is anybody thinking about the kids? The kids are the future. And, what was interesting is one of the schools I was in, I sat after I was invited to stay and talk to the grade 11 and 12 students. And they opened up and just said how it is exhaustive on their mental health, social media, how they are struggling, how they see their friends struggle. It was heartbreaking to sit there and listen. I cried.
I know, because you just want also their parents to be there listening to this.
Oh, so many kids said to me, Laura, how do we get our parents here? And I know as a teacher, I was one of the strictest ones, I think, out there when I taught. But I also, you talked to a lot of my former students, they respect that. They needed that. The kids need the discipline. They need the guardrails.
They do. And so if your child has found themselves in a situation where there's a nude image or a sexualized image of them on the internet, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children offers a service called Take It Down, where you can put in your information and it's supposed to wipe it from the web completely. And I haven't found anything that says it's not available to Canadians. So I am going to share that link, and it's takeitdown.ncmec.org, and I'll include that in the episode notes. But that is so important that you have a step to take, and that your kids, I think a proactive conversation too, I've been hearing, is so important, because a lot of kids in your son's situation feel so hopeless. Like, I got myself into this situation, that they often are suicidal. And so we have to let them know that there are steps we can take to make this okay. Like, you're not going to be in trouble. We're going to figure it out together. And you have to tell them that ahead of time, because we never know how they're going to feel in those situations and how bad it's going to get.
Absolutely. And I say that to the youth too. You have to find somebody to tell. An adult will help you, and no mistake is worth dying over, in these spaces.
No, it's so sad. They can't even make mistakes and learn from them anymore. It's like,
no,
they make a mistake and it's more horrible than it's ever been. You have 4 children, you said, and 2 are younger, right? You have 2 teens and 2 younger?
Yeah. So they're 6, 9, 14, and almost 19.
Okay. So I always find it interesting when people have older children and younger children. And I always am interested in knowing why, what changes you've made in your approaches for the older kids and then learning around that. And then now what you're doing with your younger children related to phones and social media.
Absolutely. And I've even made more changes since listening to you and many of the experts that come on you. So I want to say thank you for that because like you said, we believe these spaces to be safe and that the people who's designed them have the best interest of our kids at heart and they don't. So I will tell you one of the biggest changes is, my oldest teen, she was allowed to keep her phone in her room at night. And, here we are 4 years later, her brother is not. But at that time, the apps weren't the same as they are now. And she even said, Mama, it's not the same world. It's changed so much. Yeah. My little guys, I can say I used to allow them to watch YouTube. Not a lot. I was very strict, but without if I wasn't in the room. Mm-hmm. But what was really interesting is my son said to me one day, Mom, we were watching YouTube, listening to music videos in class because their teacher allowed them to. And he said, I saw some really inappropriate things on my friend's tablet next to me that just popped up in the middle of YouTube. And I'm like, really interesting. And so they're limited now on YouTube Tab for sure. And it's only in the living room. If I'm in there, it's not on their tablet. We've actually decreased our screen time since I've read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which is a brilliant book. I mean,
yeah, I have it right here. Let me flash it.
Everybody has to read that book.
Everyone. Yes. Everyone, please.
So good. I have decreased screen time, because in the recognition that we're literally rewiring our brains. I mean, not just our kids' brains, but the kids are the most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. And I think people feel like they have to. Like it's just everything else seems so difficult to not just be able to put them on a screen. But when you it's a choice. Just make the decision to not do it in almost every situation that you're presented with. Your kids will actually learn the skills to entertain themselves better. They'll get more creative. They'll interact with each other or just sit alone and figure out something creative to do. And those skills need to happen now when they're young because that brain wiring is done at a certain point and you miss that opportunity by blocking it with a screen.
And we all know if we spend hours and hours in front of our screen, we feel like zombies. And I can 100% see the behavior in my two smaller children change drastically if they have screen time or they're playing games. But I'll say we're very strict on what they get to play. They don't play Roblox. Mm-hmm. We're a strict family, and mm-hmm. still our kid experienced some online harms. But when they're over at other friends' house, when they're in their rink, sitting beside other kids who have access to their parents' phones. So I think mm-hmm. it's important too to have those conversations with your kids prior to saying, you might see these things. If you see something that makes you feel uncomfortable or that's not right, come talk to me about it.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think you're that strict. Like you're strict and that's good. But believe me, there's families that are more strict. So if your kids are saying, Mom, you guys are too strict. It's like, no, we actually, no. You should be lucky.
And I say that, there's, and I always say when families reach out to me, say, what's the right way, Laura? And I said, I will never tell a family what's the right way for them. No. I will always suggest delay social media. And that more, one-on-one time and family time and outside time is always better, trumps any mm-hmm. screen time. But I will never judge somebody else for what the choice they make, only share my lived experience, right?
Yes, exactly. So the default for me is, let me tell you what I do. And then if, you can take something from that if you like it or not. But you really we all have such different situations and scenarios and different ages of kids and different temperaments that you can't possibly have this is the exact way you need to approach screens in your home. And we also have to balance out school issued device use. Okay, let's get into some advice for parents. And again, there's no perfect way to do any of this, but what are some takeaways that you've learned around? Let's talk about when to give a device, what kind of device you like.
Yeah, I would say, again, like most of your guests who have lived experiences similar to what my child went through, is mm-hmm. if you can delay it for as long as you possibly can, giving them a smartphone, that is ideally the best scenario because it's like putting a kid in a candy shop and saying you can only spend half an hour here, and my kids would go to town. They would eat as much candy as they possibly could.
Totally. Right.
So we can put parameters. I can put time limits. I can monitor their phone, but I'm not going to catch everything. If they just didn't have one, That would be wonderful. So I like to see that some of these companies are coming out with these light phones and these phones like the Bark phone. We don't have that in Canada yet, where it goes back to the dummy phones, really, like the flip phones.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tool that they can use to communicate with people, but it's not a toy. And there are so many good things, I think, about those phones. They need a map to help them get around, like the weather app. Like there's fun thing, there's productive things that they can use. And that's what I like about the Bark phone specifically, and probably all these others, is you can add on additional apps over time that you feel that they need access to as they grow, even social media one day. But that day may never come for my kids. Where are you at with regards to, do the benefits of social media outweigh the risks at this point? Should we even let them access it?
They do not benefit at all. I think until these tech companies, and I see so many things online where people are like keyboard warriors. Well, if they would just parent, listen, I'm a damn good parent. And I am very knowledgeable and I am very smart, but these spaces are set up to have these kids, like I said, fall into trapdoors. And so I think that what's really important, the more parents speak up, listen, as a teacher, I always said, there is no stronger voice than the voice of a parent. But it needs to be in numbers. And so what I'm saying to some of my, friends and people who are saying, gosh, Laura, what can I do? Talk about it to other parents and say, listen, this is what we experienced. And I'm not telling you as a parent, but these places are vile for our kids to be in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, vile.
And people I have opened so many eyes because of you, been able to educate up here my community. And now parents are sending me videos from other people who are saying, how bad Roblox is, how bad Fortnite is, how these gaming platforms, which is a whole nother ball of wax we could talk about. But I think that number one, it's like, yes, if we could keep the kids out of the spaces, that ideally would be a perfect world. Number two, we need to talk to our kids about, as young as we can, about if they have access to a digital device, this is what could happen. Because, the research shows that if a kid has a smartphone, they will experience an online harm.
Yeah. If you think your kid is old enough to have access to a device that they could get on social media, you need to tell them about predators and about cyberbullying and about nude imagery and about deadly challenges and about eating disorders. Because literally they're going to learn about all of those things from social media, and you don't want that. You want to be the one to introduce those things to them.
Well, like I said, would we send our children out to a playground unsupervised where there was drug dealers, pedophiles, pornography, everything they could get into without us being there? We wouldn't do it.
No, we wouldn't. I don't even know if I'd send my daughter to the playground by herself. As it is now, I'm trying to work on that.
Right?
With my confidence down the street. But a couple other questions. So what platforms for you are off limits? Like if the parent is like, I just want them to try one to like let them get used to it before they're an adult, which ones should they definitely not be giving them, in your opinion?
Oh gosh, all of them. But I would say that's such a hard question. I would say that I ask kids this, actually. I ask them.
Good. Okay.
And it's a toss up between three, depending if they're boys or girls or what they've experienced, but they will say Snapchat. And that would be one I would say 100%. It's not necessary. They don't need it. TikTok is the next one. And then Instagram. And I just think that we think that they're so innocent, the TikTok, the dances. I know so many, 9, 10, 11-year-old girls who have TikTok, and TikTok's serving up harmful content every 39 seconds to kids. And that came from a report 2 years ago. So imagine now.
That algorithm is more psychologically manipulative than anything that exists on the internet. And it is not TikTok and a Chinese company that you want deciding what your child believes and acts like. Like, that is not safe. And I have tons of episodes about the lawsuits and the legislation surrounding TikTok that people can search for. But I agree. And I think I used to want to say Instagram is maybe the one where you can try, but there's so much sexual exploitation happening on there, drug content, inappropriate stuff. So I don't even know. Are there any platforms that you think kids could try out?
Here's what I said to one parent who said, Laura, like, she's just being pressured so much because all of her friends have these. I said, well, why don't you let her use an account that's on your phone? And you can sit with her, beside her, every time she uses it to engage. Take 20 minutes out of your day. You scroll with her. You see the messages she's seeing. I mean, why don't we do that as parents? Because we don't have the time to, but we should be.
But if it's on your phone, then you can get access to all the content later on when you're laying in bed at night and just do a quick check. It's easier on your phone than
absolutely
doing it on theirs. I love that.
So I would say
I don't love giving them access, but I love that if you're going to on your own phone and I always hear one platform at a time. Don't let them get on 3.
Yeah. So my son, he has time limits. He gets 30 minutes on TikTok a day, and that's enough. The other day, he's like, "Can I get more?" No, find something else to do. Right. You can watch the same, truck and farm videos tomorrow. Like, you don't need to.
Well, because what's the benefit, number one, of the time spent doing that? And also, what is it displacing you from doing all the other more positive activities and people to be interacting with?
Yeah. And I think a lot of adults, we need to be having this conversation with ourselves. Like, what's the cost benefit? Like, what are we giving up to get?
Get what? Like, you don't feel good after you scroll for even 30 minutes or 20 minutes. So you feel like you didn't accomplish anything. You're zombied out. You feel a little depressed and you're not sure why. Like, that's why, I mean, personally, I deleted all my social media in 2020 for about 3.5 years. I had nothing until I started the podcast, and I was like, okay, I gotta do this now. But I felt so much better. And actually my relationships with actual human beings that I know in person, they improved because I spent more time communicating with them one-on-one, and that's more valuable to them. Me sharing a video of my kid directly with my friend via text message is so much more meaningful than me posting it on a social media platform to hundreds of people.
Absolutely. And I had a student stand up in one of my last presentations. She was so brave and I was so proud of her. She said, "You know what? I took off all of my apps from my phone." And she said, "My mental health never felt better. I'm sleeping better." And, I thought for her to stand up in front of all these other kids to say that, it's like being a leader, right? It takes one to start the movement. And my goal, Nikki, is like my youngest is 6. I hope by the time he's 10, we have legislation in this country that prevents any tech company from literally continuing the criminal activity that they are daily engaging in.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am hopeful. I'm hopeful. And I think it's taken just a few dozen brave parents really speaking out on a national, international level and telling the most horrible stories really about their kids in the worst day of their lives, but sharing it with people so that we can protect our children. But also legislators are like, "Oh my God, I didn't realize it was this bad." You think it's just, it makes them a little anxious or they'll probably be fine. But no, it is so much worse than that. And it also it could happen to your kid. These kids that have been harmed or killed, they were just like our kids. That's the biggest thing I've learned through my conversations with these parent survivors is that I see them and I'm like, "Oh my God, that could be my son in a few years." And so the situation is urgent. And
it's urgent. It's dire. It's dire.
I wonder if you have any other last advice for parents or anything we didn't cover that you wanted to share.
Well, I would say if you're a parent like me whose children, my teen has social media, he has limited time, but he still has access. It's just things like, making sure that their notifications are set to off, making sure they don't keep their phone in their room at night. That is the number one thing I think every parent can do immediately. It's not taking their phone away. It's not limiting access. They're sleeping or they should be. Take it out of their rooms. Take it out of their rooms. And I would say that if your child experienced an online harm like mine, speak up about it, because thankfully my son, his mental health was in a state where he didn't become a victim of something like suicide, but it could have happened. Can you just about imagine having hundreds, thousands of kids seeing an image like that? And how do you wake up every day as a 14-year-old and be like, well, carry on? It's so dire to have these conversations with our kids and not to turn a blind eye. It's the elephant in the room and it's time to address it.
Thank you so much for this important conversation. Listeners, please connect with Laura at Youth Matter Canada on her website. I'll include those links in the episode notes, and we will be back with another conversation on Laura's podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome.